Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
Give yourself time to adjust to a newly diagnosis. I think it's a lot to process, and it's going to take time to get used to that and then adjust to that. I would also say it's really important to not be too hard on yourself. Don't expect to do too much at once, so don't be too hard on yourself. I think that's really important.
That's our guest this week, David Ross, a rare disease leader in men's mental health. He plans and hosts valuable international support calls focused on men in the rare disease community. David also has a rare disease himself called Cowden Syndrome. We'll hear how he works, thinks, and deals with his rare disease on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Say hello now to the founder of the Special Fathers Network and the host of the Dad to Dad podcast, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers, Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network. Please support the 21st Century Dads Foundation by contributing to Dads on a Ride 2023, which is a 3,100-mile, 7-day bicycle ride taking place from June 17th to the 24th, starting in Oceanside, California, and ending in Annapolis, Maryland. I'm one of the 4 riders and would really appreciate your support. Please make a tax-deductible contribution by going to 21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org. And now let's hear this discussion between two Davids, David Hirsch and David Ross.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with David Ross of Little-Hapmton, England, a patient advocate at Rare Disease Male Mental Health Support Group, who himself has Cowden disease, a rare disease that increases the risk of getting certain cancers, benign growths, and is linked to autism as well as neurodevelopmental delays. David, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Thank you for inviting me.
You and your wife, Sharon, have been married for 20 years and are the proud parents of Rachel, who is 17. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
I grew up in a place called Tunbridge Wells in Kent. Family were at that time pretty much close together, grandparents around. My mother had me when I was young. And I never knew my real father. I never knew anything about him until my mum passed away in 2016. Shortly after, I found out some information about him. So I was always close to my grandparents very much, and my aunt and uncle, who were not much older than my mum. I think my aunt lived at home when I was born. So I had a big sister in her. So yeah, good times really, and I definitely felt loved and supported looking back then.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing. And sorry about not knowing who your biological dad was, but yeah. My recollection was that your mom remarried when you were quite young. And I'm wondering, how did that transpire and what influence did your, stepdad have on your life?
My mother remarried when I was 5. I can kind of vaguely remember the wedding day. I was a page boy. It all felt very good, very exciting. Family around at the time. Yeah, he was a policeman. So we moved from Kent to Little-Hapmton. And yeah, it felt kind of part of a proper family at that point in time. He struggled a bit when I was younger as a father. He never knew his real dad. But, he was there. He was determined. He was hardworking. And yeah, as our relationship grew over time and I got older, I developed a real strong bond with him. I felt going fishing, talking about sport. So yeah, it was a good. Well, it became a good relationship. That's how I describe it.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. And I know that it must have been difficult at first, but I think maybe as we each mature, get older, we look at our parents from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Physically, like we're getting to be closer to the same size that they are, And then, your life's experience, helps put things in perspective too. And maybe we become a little less judgmental about things. I'd like to think.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you have any siblings when you were growing up?
Yeah, so my mother and my adoptive father, they had another child, and that was my sister, Joanne, who was born just under 5 years after me. I remember as younger children, we kind of were close, but I think kind of as we became teenagers, slightly going different separate paths, really. And she was different to me. She had different interests, different hobbies, and ever since then, as we started to grow up, I don't remember us ever being as close as we once were when we were small children.
Well, thanks for sharing. And I'm thinking about other men who might have played an influence, and I'm wondering if your stepdad's dad or your mom's dad had an influential role in your life.
Yeah, very much my mother's father played a big role in my life. I think having my mum remarry and having her dad was great. It was challenging at times, but, it benefited me in lots of ways as discussed. But I don't know, it never felt quite the same as perhaps having a biological father. Maybe could replace that. But my relationship with my grandfather, I would say, was unique and special. And I still felt, looking back overall, he has been kind of that closest. He was very much involved in taking me out to places, museums, walks in the country, getting me interested in music. He was very much his own person, but he was always there. Their relationship, especially after my mum passed away, was one of the best things I've ever had, where it was tough, but I was his carer. Looking back, I really now realise how much he taught me and how much an influence he'd been on my life. So, yeah, special to say the least.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. It sounds like it was a special relationship that you shared with him. And, that's something we have in common, not only our first names, but the fact that our maternal grandfathers played an influential role in our lives.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important message for our listeners, is that, grandparents do play, or can play, a really influential role in their not only children's but grandchildren's lives. And you don't know until maybe you look back afterwards, right? You can connect the dots looking back, what an influence that they had. So I'm really pleased for you. So my recollection was that from an educational perspective, you graduated from Sixth Village Academy. What is that?
That's a high school. And I know the year of graduation is different to the US. Yes, I graduated when I was 16. After that, I went to music college, but I don't know, I think my parents were splitting up then. And not only that, I kind of realised, as much as I would love it to be, I wasn't going to make any sort of career as a musician. So, yeah, I kind of dropped out of college and kind of a period of time, really, I've kind of lost my way a bit, and not in a negative way, but kind of drifted a bit from job to job. I think kind of like looking back, it was kind of like, I don't know really, when something goes wrong, you don't always know which way to turn, but yeah, that's kind of what happened after education.
Well, thanks for sharing and being so open and authentic. My recollection was, from a career standpoint, you spent the better part of 9 years at Morrison's.
Yes.
As part of the sales floor team. So that gave you a lot of work experience and working with people and sales experience for that matter. And then for the last whatever number of years, you've been a rare patient advocate.
Yes.
You also had been involved with, or maybe still are, with an organization called Eurydice. And I'm wondering, what does Eurydice do?
So Eurydice is a rare disease organisation. So there are about 7,000, I think, at the latest count, different rare diseases. But some of these organisations are very small. So Eurydice gives them support to help their communities. It also fights for policies that will help people with disabilities, disadvantages. It's very much, I would describe it as kind of the political wing of rare diseases. It's closely linked to the European Union. So it's kind of politics, rights, legislation, funding, And it's kind of like, I would say, how to make things happen in a real way. I think kind of like support groups are great and are really helpful. But sometimes you need more than support group. You kind of need policies that will actually support and change people's life, other aspects that a support group can't.
So Eurodis, EURODIS, is that combining like Europe and disability? Is that sort of the...
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's include that in the show notes so that'll make it easy as possible for somebody to learn a little bit more about that. So let's talk about special needs, first from a father's perspective and then from a personal perspective. So you'd mentioned that Rachel is 17.
Yes.
And, from one father to the next, that's a challenging age to be a parent. I'm sure it's even more challenging to be the teenager at times.
Yeah, she doesn't have a rare disease, which is great. And we're very relieved and feel very lucky that she doesn't have one. She does talk about kind of missing her my mother, who passed away to the same rare disease as me, and missing my nephew and one of my sister's children who passed away to a different rare disease. She has mentioned at times, she does worry when I go for scans for my rare disease. I have to go for certain scans every year or two. Yeah, she has kind of, are you okay, Dad? Is everything going to be all right? So you kind of need to have those conversations about what they're about. And actually, these scans are preventative and kind of, in some respects, you're really lucky to have those scans because they're keeping on top of your health. But, the main thing is, we work through that, we talk through that. And we admit it's hard, we admit it's not the same, but we look to building our relationship and look to supporting her the best way I can as a father.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Any challenges that you've experienced as a dad to an only child?
There have been challenges. In fact, it's hard for both of us in different ways. It's also hard for her more, as you just kind of mentioned, her being a teenager. But I think through those challenges, I would say our relationship has got better because of it. Being honest about the situation and having those conversations has kind of helped us. I think I've become more, over the past few years, become better at talking through emotions with her as a father, feelings, and having those conversations as someone that is almost 18. I think that's really important for her.
Okay. Well, thank you. I know that there's a lot of changes taking place in people's lives when they're teenagers. There's the anxiety that goes along with, what am I going to do? Am I going to go to school? Am I going to go to work? How am I going to support myself?
Yeah.
And, there's an expectation that you're going to be independent.
Yeah.
And be on your own. And, some kids can't wait. And other kids are like, I don't want to get out of bed.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave the nest. And occasionally we joke about the umbilical cord being stretched, into their 20s or into their 30s. And at some point in time, you have to be willing to cut the umbilical cord and move on.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for sharing. So let's talk about your own situation. I'm sort of curious to know, how did your diagnosis of Cowden Syndrome come about? What age were you? And, what were the, symptoms that might suggest that you had this?
Yeah, so it came about through my mother about a year before she passed in around 2015. She gave me a letter which basically was like the information that I needed to give to the doctor should I want to get tested. And at the time I was like, I've no obvious symptoms, everything okay. As soon as she passed away, I felt, that letter that she gave to me was totally the right thing for her to do, and I almost felt to kind of like, I don't know, really, to give her passing some sort of meaning. I had to get tested, and I was found to have the condition, which it still wasn't long after she went. I was still grieving, so it was like a lot of emotions to process and work through. But at that time, I also wanted to get Rachel tested, which was an option to me. She had the condition or not, but I felt like, well, it just something that had to be done. So got her tested and was found out that she didn't have the condition, which was great, which was a real relief. And then I could focus on coming to terms with the condition.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. So if I can paraphrase what you've said, Cowden syndrome is not something that you would know you would have unless a family member, like your mom in your case, would have passed some information along to you.
Yeah.
And you might not learn about this until you're an adult, because if I did the math correctly, if your mom is sharing this letter with you a year before she passed away, you were about 40 years old at the time.
Yeah.
If your mom was in declining health, you're learning about her situation. Obviously, your mom passing's got to be a very emotional situation. Then getting tested yourself shortly thereafter, it sort of rocks your world, because now all of a sudden, you reflect on your own life expectancy and say, well, geez, how is this going to impact me? How long am I going to live? All those mental gymnastics that take place in somebody's mind. So you weren't diagnosed as a youth. You weren't sort of aware of the syndrome until you were an adult. So I'm wondering, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced now knowing that you have this Cowden syndrome, and how has it affected your decision making?
I think some of the challenges I've faced have been around kind of taking care more of my health, not trying to do too much. I think it kind of also impacts my relationship with my daughter, as discussed, kind of being supportive to her, like in the way kind of discussed earlier. It makes me more appreciative of what I have. The fact that I can still do certain things is great. I try and appreciate the good things that I do have in my life. In a funny sort of way, I used to worry or get stressed about stuff more, but now I don't. I take things more my stride, because it does take out a lot of energy out of you, getting worked up about things, especially things that aren't worth it. And I save my energy to appreciate the great things I do have, because you kind of want to keep your energy for challenges you may face with your health in the future.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. So what I heard you say is that there's a higher emphasis on self-care, taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
Probably eating right, exercising, getting, the right amount of sleep, that type of thing, and being consistent about it. And it seems like it might have had a positive effect, at least from certain perspectives, that maybe you appreciate things a little bit more, and maybe you don't get stressed out over some of the little stuff that, we all get stressed out over, just because. And it might have the impact of maybe bringing you closer with your daughter, right? Not that she's fearful of losing you anytime soon, but, just being able to talk about things. That's something that I struggle with. I know that a lot of guys struggle with is, expressing their emotions.
Yeah.
For some reason, it's perceived, at least outwardly, as a sign of weakness, right? If you have emotions, you don't have to wear all your emotions on your sleeve and lead with everything you're thinking or feeling. But I think particularly as a father and raising a daughter, women are more emotional creatures on average than men. And your ability to express yourself and be more empathetic and understanding is probably a really important trait to have.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So are there any supporting organizations that come to mind, either for individuals like yourself with Cowden syndrome or other rare diseases or mental health issues?
From my own rare disease organisation, there is a charity in the UK called P10 UKI, because P10, because of the tumour suppressor gene problems, cancers, and issues with my condition. They're really good. They're making great guns, supporting the community. Global Genes in the USA are great at looking at the human emotional impact of being impacted by rare diseases, whether it be a patient or caregiver. all these organisations are doing great, and I think they're not only doing great, they're getting better, getting closer to patients, caregivers, and it's important that they all stay focused with that, which they all seem to be doing great at that.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st Century Dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
I'm wondering what role spirituality has played in your life.
I would have to say quite a bit, really. Over the past few years, I think losing my nephew, that just kind of like losing someone younger than you was something I found really hard. I just felt lost at the time with that. Yeah, we all knew he wasn't going to live a long life, but we weren't prepared for when the end came, as I suppose other people aren't. So I think that's kind of made me like look into kind of meditating and listening to other people speak about their mental health struggles and having a better connection to yourself.
Yeah, well, out of curiosity, how old was your nephew when he passed?
He was 22.
Wow, that is really young.
Yeah.
And did you say that you knew that he wasn't going to have a long life expectancy? Did he have a condition or diagnosis himself?
Yeah, he was diagnosed with his rare disease at 6 months. And kind of the prognosis at that time was like sometime in his 20s, he would probably pass away. I know. Yeah, I think it's that thing of, there's just nothing you can do for people, loved ones. And that's hard to sometimes accept. We don't speak about it, my sister and me, because it is so painful and so hard, and which is kind of a shame in a way, but it's just difficult, and it's forever. And yes, I kind of think he's with us in our hearts. It's still not the same as seeing him and being with him in person.
So what was his name and what was his diagnosis?
Yeah, his name was Ashley, and his diagnosis was a rare disease called, this is one I might need to spell to you. It's called Pelizaeus-Merzbacher disease.
Pelizaeus-Merzbacher? Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Pelizaeus-Merzbacher.
Okay. Well, I'm sad that he died at such a young age and that he had to struggle with whatever that disease and condition brought to his life. But, every life is important and needs to be honored. And
yeah,
I'm hoping just by reflecting on your nephew and the role that he played and the fact that you had mentioned, while he might not be here physically, he's still in your hearts, right? He had an influence and an impact on your lives. And that, maybe with time, the pain will be a little bit less, and that, you can put that experience into perspective.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering, what advice would you give to a dad, either one that's raising a child with special needs, or if a dad finds himself, in the same situation that you do, you're the person with the rare disease or potential disability?
I would say give yourself time to adjust to a newly diagnosis. That's really important. I think it's a lot to process, a lot of possible change, and it's going to take time to get used to that and then adjust to that. I would also say it's really important to not be too hard on yourself. I think in one respect, routine and normality is important, but don't expect to do too much at once. So don't be too hard on yourself. I think that's really important. I also think talk to people. Start with your family first, and also kind of look for support group and look for professional help if needed, because I think talking about it is the only way you're going to make sense of it, understand it. This is real, it's happening. I think it's really important to talk to loved ones about it, and they may have concerns and worries, about how you're feeling, what you're going through. And, it's not weak. It's not a bad thing to sort of express how you're feeling and how any concerns, because these things are things that we're going through. And I've actually found, kind of like, for me as a father, talking to my daughter about it has strengthened our relationship by our honesty. And actually, it's about kind of being stronger people. And really, I kind of think that is how you do that, really. But we're talking through, we're working through, that is a strong thing as a man, as a father, to go through. And we're facing some big challenges here, and it's certainly not weak or vulnerable to kind of bottle those up.
Yeah, well, I think those are words of wisdom. If I can paraphrase what you've said, give yourself time to adjust. Don't be too hard on yourself, if you're not able to do everything that you might have expected to be able to do. And then the importance of communication, not only with your family and maybe seeking out a support group or groups, but, if you need help, you know that you're not where you want to be, there are opportunities to get professional help, whether it's counseling or a therapy of some type. So I think that that's really insightful. Is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just probably like to say, really, and I know obviously females go through problems and challenges, but speaking from that kind of perspective of being a man, I think having a rare disease, whether that be a patient or caregiver, comes with many added layers, and it's a lot of challenges that potentially we are currently facing or have to face in the future. Uncertainty is part of life, but I think it's more, again, when you have to face these things. And I think it's really important to kind of acknowledge, as men, we have to be stronger. And I think however you want to do it, I get it, not everyone wants to join a support group. Not everyone feels they need professional help, but I think it's important to talk through these issues with whoever you feel comfortable with, because these are big things. I mean, another thing I kind of get and understand running my support group, I get it, guys are busy, guys have a lot going on, but also I think that's another reason, we need to make time for ourselves and our mental health as men, whatever support you may need, as discussed, kind of like professional support or friend or family member. So I think that's important as well. That gets forgotten. I know we are busy as men and we have a lot going on, but we mustn't forget or make some time for ourselves and for our emotional mental health challenges that we face.
Yeah, well, thanks for emphasizing that. And I think that, most men, and I don't know we can speak for everybody on the planet, are probably more concerned with their physical well-being than their emotional or psychological, mental well-being. And I think that there's a huge opportunity there, like you were emphasizing, to be a little bit more aware of and cognizant of our mental health, right? And part of that is just being able to express yourself. And, if you don't have that family member or family members, if you're not plugged into a support group, then maybe the method of last resort would be to seek out professional help, like you were saying.
Yeah.
So thank you for being so open and transparent about that. I'm hoping that more men will hear the message and be less reluctant to follow through.
Yeah, thank you.
So if somebody wants to learn more about your work or to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
The best way to contact me would be by email, and that would be mensrareddiseasemh@gmail.com.
Okay. We'll ensure to include that in the show notes so it'll make it as easy as possible for people to follow up with you. David, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, David is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. David, thanks again.
Thank you, David.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.